Hey, it's been a while. I'm going to try like a different type of long form content, just like upload all this stuff on YouTube, because I feel like anytime I do like a journal club talk with you guys, it's just super long anyway, and it's on Instagram, and I might as well just put it on YouTube and just kind of pull like highlighted clips, right? So the paper we'll be reviewing today is Evaluating Velocity-Based Approaches for Predicting One Repetition Maximums in the Snatch by Mao and colleagues, and they're literally from all over the world. I already did a initial read through, kind of pulled all of like the highlighted portions of it that I wanted to talk about, because like as a coach, as an athlete, as a practitioner, even like someone who's like used to reading academic literature, like this was a hard paper to read through. So it's like being able to just read it first, talk to you guys about it, and just like almost dumb it down so like you can actually use it. Because like who the heck is gonna be reading this paper and actually like trying to use it if you were like a coach? You guys got other things to worry about. So starting with like the intro, they talk about like why it's important to predict 1 rep maxes. Of course, like we could always test for it, but like the example that they use is like a competition, like trying to establish a good opening first attempt. You don't want to be too heavy and then risk not actually making it, or you don't want to be too light and risk not being able to work on heavier or do heavier loads for your second or third attempt. The goal of this paper, there were two. First one was to, this is a mouthful, examine the between session reliability of actual minimum velocity thresholds, optimal minimum velocity thresholds, and peak velocity associated with 50%, 70%, 80%, and 90% 1 rep max in the snatch. So taking two different sessions, session 1, session 2, how are they repeatable? Is it like a reliable method to predict 1 rep max in the first session, and are we able to get a similar value the second time around? Goal number 2 now is to evaluate the accuracy of different velocity-based methods that I just mentioned for predicting snatch 1 rep max in a follow-up session. So taking session 1, working up to a 1 rep max, taking that information, like peak velocity stuff at like different percentages, and is that able to predict what someone's going to be able to do in session 2. Okay, so now moving on to the methods, which I tried my best to like wrap my mind around it, because essentially when you write an article, it should be repeatable to whoever is like using it or reading it. And I had a hard time like wrapping my mind around it. So like you as a coach, if you're trying to do this, like, and if you're struggling, like that's fair, because this was hard to like understand. But essentially they did a repeated measures design, which means that they did whatever they did the first week, they did the exact same thing the second week, with like a 1 week break in between. They had everyone snatch 50, 70, 80, and 90% of their best snatch within the last month. Pretty much what they did was like using those values, are they able to predict what they were gonna lift the second week, or like of that same week. How they did this study was that they used a linear position transducer, which is, I think, is like one of those velocity things on a tether. Using that, they got peak velocity. Only the fastest rep was used for analysis. And they had 3 different methods to like kind of test in this study. For the most part, it was all relying on creating a regression model. So they like plotted everything. So like velocity on the y-axis, load on the x-axis, create a line, and now you have like an intercept and a slope, you know, all these things that we learned in like algebra 1. So now you have like this nice pretty equation that you can use to like plug things in. And then to reiterate, they had like 3 different methods that they're testing. So like using actual minimum velocity threshold, using an optimal minimum velocity threshold, and then like a % 1 rep max peak velocity relationship to test and predict what their 1 rep max is gonna be. What they said was that, or what they did was actual MVT, I'm just gonna say that, minimum velocity threshold, was like what was actually recorded from their 1 rep max, like peak velocity. The optimal MVT was calculated using this equation from the slope, and using like the slope linear regression. And then each individual also had like their 1 rep max peak velocity relationship equation. And then from there, 1 rep max was then calculated using the equation. Estimated 1 rep max equals absolute load divided by estimated 1 rep max. If you're lost, because I'm lost, it's fine. We'll talk about it in the next few minutes in like their discussion on like what's actually like important here and like what the big takeaways are. And so pretty much what the authors concluded here in their study was that the 3 methods using actual MVT, optimal MVT, and like peak velocities at percent submax loads all demonstrated acceptable between sessions reliability. So what that means was that trying to use these methods to predict 1 rep max in session 1 were just as repeatable and reliable to do it all again in session 2. Another big takeaway that they said was that absolute error was below 5 kilos when using actual and optimal MVT, which means that there's some wiggle room up to 5 kilos in like that snatch prediction, which depending on how much you lift, 5 kilos could be a lot, but what they're saying is like it's below that. And then in regards to their using like 1 rep max peak velocity relationships, it's best to use like 80 or 90% predictor values to estimate 1 rep max, because if you were to look at, and they suggested like looking at like their graph, peak velocity measurements around 50% were just like super unreliable. So like as like someone's warming up, you're not going to be able to be like as consistent with technique, but as you get heavier and heavier, that's when like things start to like technique starts to narrow in and hone in a little bit more. So using 80% or 90% would be a better predictor. How someone would try to use this in terms of like day of competition boggles me. Like especially like, let's say someone's trying to use like a 1% or a percent 1 rep max method. You're not gonna set up like a VBT to capture your velocities as the athlete's warming up in the back room. And especially because like, I mean, depending on how much they're gonna open out with, like 90%, trying to predict their 1 rep max to figure out what their opening attempt is gonna be in the back room, and they're asking you to, oh, like it's best to use 80%, like, I don't know. I just think it's kind of silly to like have that be their reasoning. But I mean, like, I guess like, yeah, sure, like you're doing this a week out, it's their last heavy day, trying to like work up to like their 1 rep max or just like max out, like I guess it makes sense. But at that point you're already testing your max, you know? So it's like, I don't really quite understand how this all like practically works out, right? I would assume it probably works if you were to use like a camera-based system, or like a camera-based tracking system, but let me know. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it's like cool to use without like testing it. I guess it's just another way to just play around with like some data that we all love to collect, right? So try it out, let me know how it goes, if you have access to BBT equipment, and if you happen to use this for figuring out your competition opener, like best of luck. I feel like, I mean, even like the author said here, like there's so many factors that go into snatching, and just picking an opener, like the mental nerves, food, fuel, cutting, whatever, those are all like things to take into consideration. So, but yeah, so that was this paper. If you like this method of me trying to dissect a paper with you, let me know. Obviously my role here is to just like actually get all this literature that's out in the ether to the coaches so they can understand what the heck to do with it. Because obviously me as like a researcher student, like this was hard to like even understand. So let me know if you kind of like appreciate this like type of video and stuff where we're going through it together. If you happen to read it thoroughly, let me know your thoughts, and if there's anything I was missing, let me know too. But okay, so I guess that's kind of all for me, but I'll see you next time.